All right, well, the honeymoon period for Kamala's VP pick, Tim Walz, is not going to last very long because people like our next guest are shedding light on who this man really is. Joining me now is president of the Center of the American Experiment, John Hinderaker, who also writes for the Powerline blog, and here's the most important bit, lives in Tim Walz's state of Minnesota. John, thank you so much for coming on tonight here. You've written a fantastic piece breaking down why Tim Walz is the worst ever governor. But before we get into that, yesterday he spoke at his first rally. Let's have a listen to him challenging Republican Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance to a debate.
Like all regular people I grew up with in the heartland, J.D. studied at Yale, had his career funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, and then wrote a bestseller trashing that community. Come on! That's not what middle America is. And I gotta tell you, I can't wait to debate the guy.
John, I've got to ask you, listening to Tim Walz there, what on earth is the trouble with making it out of poverty to go to Yale and be successful in business? This seems like the American dream. What is Tim Walz's problem here?
Well, Tim Walz is a mean-spirited and rather vicious man, and he's going to do a good job of playing the traditional role of the vice presidential nominee, that is being the attack dog who always goes low against the opposition. But it comes very naturally to him because this is really what he is.
And, you know, you live in Minnesota. I want to hear more about what that's been like under Tim Walz's governorship. One thing, though, that's been an absolute red flag to me, and I know will be to a lot of our viewers, was his behavior during COVID when he made it essentially illegal to leave the house without his permission. And he even set up a snitch line so you could call in and report your neighbors. This seems to me deeply un-American, if not, frankly, kind of fascist.
James, it's the most fascist, purely fascist act I'm aware of by any American government official. When the COVID epidemic came along, Tim Walz literally issued an executive order that said that no resident of the state of Minnesota was allowed to leave his house except as permitted by order of the governor. It's absolutely shocking. And then he would put down here limited purposes for which you are allowed to leave your house. He shut down small businesses. He shut down churches. He shut down the schools. It was a catastrophically bad set of policies.
Yeah, and it's not just that, though. The crime has, for example, been increasing for the first time in Minnesota's history. You say on the Powerline blog, for the first time, crime has become a real issue in Minnesota. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Tim Walz has a horrible record. In that sense, it makes him a good running mate for Kamala Harris, who also has a terrible record. Minnesota was always a low crime state. We always had crime rates well below the national average until Tim Walz came along. And as you can see in the chart there, that comes from my organization, American Experiment, Minnesota, starting in 2020 with the George Floyd riots, when Tim Walz dithered for 4 nights, allowed the riots to go on, refused to call in the National Guard because he said he was really pretty sympathetic to the rioters' cause. And a big chunk of the city of Minneapolis burned down, as did other cities in the metropolitan area. Finally, after 4 days, he was persuaded to call out the National Guard, and it stopped the riots, but it didn't stop the crime spree. And crime in Minnesota has continued to be elevated, so that for the first time ever in our history, we are now a high crime state with a higher than average rate of serious crime. That had never happened before the Tim Walz administration.